Welcome to Voices in Hyperspace. This is a podcast where cool friends get together and discuss all things sci-fi. Our main mission is to watch, review, and give our opinions on the hit 90s TV series Babylon 5. Real quickly, for this episode, I wanted to give you a heads up. We originally recorded this episode and it was lost due to file corruption. It was very unfortunate, and that's just one of those technical difficulties that I am coming up with a solution with. So that means the rest of the crew is not here. And what I'm going to do is go through real quickly to give my impression, a few events, and get us connected to the next episode. Since this is a two-part episode, it does stop with a cliffhanger. And honestly, I'll say that that's pretty cool because these stories are getting to the point where they are so big that they often do take more than one episode. I do recognize that there may be some motivation from the studio, from the network, any of those things to get people to come back and watch each week. The cool thing is this series does have a lot of really good writing. And, you know, you'll hear us make fun of certain things about some of the characters, but all of that is in good fun because this, like, the truth is, the show was written very, very well, especially for the time that it came out in. There was a lot of TV in the 90s. There was a lot of bad TV, especially when it comes to the sci-fi genre. There wasn't a lot of great prospects, but just so I can point it out, a lot of us sci-fi fans, sci-fi enthusiasts were watching Babylon 5. We were watching the different Star Treks. And we were having fun with that. We're also probably watching The Outer Limits and stuff like that, too. I know I was. So let's start off with a very brief outlook on the whole episode. We see a lot of the different characters all interacting. We see some of the alien characters. We see the human characters. It actually starts off with a humorous spot with Garibaldi, Talia, and Sinclair. Basically, Talia is weirded out that Garibaldi seems to be everywhere that she is. And this starts off the weird dynamic that they both have in this episode for whatever reason. And I think I do knows where Talia is. It's a little creepy, and it makes me wonder what Garibaldi is thinking. Is she someone he's attracted to, or is she someone that he's paying a lot more attention to for another reason? And it also could be one of those hard-boiled cop things where he just has an instinct, and for whatever reason, he's interested in her. In earlier episodes, he did reach out to her. He wanted to connect with her. He was trying to flirt with her. That didn't happen. But he seemed to be wanting to be around her, and she just wanted to avoid him. And I think they start off showing that. So whatever else happens in this episode, there is this tension between the two. In the meantime, Babylon 5 is launching a scientific discovery mission of Epsilon III. While they are preparing, there are seismic disturbances coming from the planet. The planet emits a large power surge and it knocks out the survey team's sensors and powers. Ivanova is sending help to retrieve that team. And then this is where we get to the opening credits. Throughout the show, they are basically showing how there's a lot of mystery surrounding Epsilon 3. And this survey team, the scientific survey team, they're very cavalier. They are really excited about the information that they can gain from the planet, but they are running into obstacles, not really obstacles, but just warnings from Susie and Ivanova and the command staff from Babylon 5. Really, this is showing kind of like the dynamic that they have. The scientific team, they don't care. They are most excited about just being able to do their jobs, go down to the planet, even though the planet seems to be very dangerous. Anything that is being said about how they can play it safe is just constantly being shrugged off. Sinclair is curious as far as like what is going on with that planet. They do find out that there is a pattern coming from the planet. It's like a beam. They don't know what it means, but they hope that it's something that is not as dangerous as they think that it is. We'll come back to that a little bit later in the show. On top of that, Sinclair is facilitating trade negotiations between DeLynn and Londo. Sinclair seems to believe that the deal is fair, but Londo doesn't think so. His what's great about this actor, he's showing kind of reluctance. He's showing more than anything, just kind of like, I would say, annoyance with it. But he says, um, we'll just go with it. And so they signed this new trade agreement. Sinclair goes with it, and he leaves to go get those negotiations, like the papers, taken care of. But Londo, he is talking to Delenn, and he is insulting Jakar's negotiation tactics. So Jakar is the only alien character that is not present, but I think it is promising that he is being mentioned by name, because it reminds viewers of that relationship that they have, that Londo is part of the Centauri, and they are the colonizers of the Narn, and Londo expects lots of resistance from the Centauri action. In the past episodes, Jakar has shown nothing but obstruction to the Centauri, but he's also shown a lot of unreasonable movement for the Narn, because a lot of what he's asking for is either in direct conflict with the interests of the Centauri, or is at the expense of the Centauri themselves. And so this is where Londo, he talks about the Narn's agenda against the Centauri. And we have to also remember that the Centauri are the colonizers of the Narn. And this is where we get this really cool saying from Londo. He says, physics tells us that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. They hate us, we hate them, they hit us back, and so on. Here we are, victims of mathematics. Throughout the whole series, Londo does this. He just says, this is just what we do. We hate each other. We're going to do this song and dance over and over. There's no other choice. This, I think, right now, this is an interesting thing to look at, especially with 2024 goggles on, because with the Centauri's relationship to the Narn, they are the ones who have the power. The Narn are gaining power in the galaxy, and they are trying their best to get a foothold so they can look out for their better interests. Viewers do have a lot of evidence, or a lot of different bits and pieces, to think a lot of different things about the Narn. They are the former slaves of the Narn, of the Centauri. But at the same time, what we have seen of the Narn is they are very brutal. Along with the last episode where the telepath scanned Natof's brain and said it was very cold and very dangerous, or, very different. We don't know exactly if all Narn think like her, or if she is a special case. I said she was a psychopath. So we are being presented with just some interesting dynamics, a lot of bits and pieces of how this relationship between those two work. I think it's pretty interesting, because as this relationship progresses, the viewer, the audience, is going to have the opportunity to actually pick a side. And I'm not going to get into that now. We're still in season 1. We'll look more into it in season 2. But remember these things that Londo is saying. He is saying that they're playing this Songa game back and forth, and he thinks that it's just fate. I personally don't think it is, but we'll see where it leads to later in the story. Now, I know I'm glazing over a lot of these things, but I also want to kind of touch on some breadcrumbs. This is actually one of the things that's happening in the background of this episode. There is a conflict that breaks out on Mars. Sinclair sees a newscast where there is a pro-Mars group that is taking violent action on Mars. They use the phrase that they are going to make the Martian sand run red with Earther blood. And Sinclair, he has this conversation with Ivanova later. They're talking about it. Like, she says, did you see the newscast? And he's very worried about it. And this is where we learn about Sinclair himself a lot more. We learn that he was a human born on Mars, and he's concerned about Mars because that's where he grew up, which most likely means he knew people there. He has friends, family, etc. And we understand that he's being distracted by these plans, or by these actions, because along with his day-to-day duties, he is showing his more human side. He hasn't really picked a side on that conflict, Earther versus human. But in the next episode, you will see that there is a character that speaks up for the pro-Earth humans and the reaction that they get. But this points to a greater rift in the internal relationships between humans in the galaxy. Not every human has the same view as other humans. Humans in this show are not a monolith. And you see that in several other episodes, especially the ones where they are exploring the different religions, and they show that humans have so many different religions. Also, you see that humans have a wide diversity of approaches to politics. When you have some people who are more militaristic, some people who are more authoritarian, and then those who are more diplomatic and democratic. And then you have people who are just bogged down with bureaucracy, or they believe in the bureaucracy and that's just how things should be done. So I find that very interesting because a lot of sci-fi really just kind of touches on the democracy and diplomacy part, but they don't talk about where humans are coming from. They don't talk about the diverse backgrounds that humans have. And, you know, even though it's not a lot there, you know, they really only do it on the religion side. This is more than what sci-fi fans and watchers back then were getting. And it just makes it so much more interesting because it stands out. So it's not a big stretch to point out that this show represents a lot of different people with a lot of different backgrounds and many different episodes. They try their best to look at people from different backgrounds, different walks of life, and not just the military, which is something that I don't know if that's a Star Trek thing because of their military structure, but you only see one side of things or one view of things on that show, which I'm not going to complain about it. You know, they do a little bit more in Deep Space Nine, but whatever. So in this episode, Sinclair reveals to Ivanova that while they're eating breakfast, you know, when he was watching that newscast, he was about to go to sleep. He did see a vision of an alien. He was about to reveal that to Ivanova, but then he just changes his mind, which is another thing that I find interesting. We have discussed how Sinclair has a lot on his mind with maybe his guilt from the war, maybe the guilt from his placement, how so many people are challenging his position, and he just didn't want to give one more thing to his crew to doubt him. Now, we think that we talked about the relationship between Sinclair and Ivanova. They really trust each other, and same thing with Garibaldi. Sinclair trusts Garibaldi, and we'll find out a little bit more about that in this episode. But this seems like something, I guess, with work people, you're not gonna readily reveal to them, hey, I'm seeing things. Do you think I'm crazy? Which, yeah, that's totally fine. And I respect that decision. Another thing happening in this episode is Delenn is being visited by her old mentor, Draal. He is a Minbari. I don't know what caste he's from, but if I were to guess, maybe he's from the religious caste. I originally was trying to see who belonged to what caste based on the shape of their bone, their cranial bones. And his are pretty sharp, but I don't know if that actually means anything. So they're together and they're having a conversation. This is where Draal is basically repeating himself to Delenn, and she's finishing his sentences. And then she just gets down to the point, like, you still haven't told me why you're here. And this is where Draal lets go the idea that maybe he's going to go to the Sea of Stars. Now, when I first originally recorded this, I was like, what is the Sea of Stars? I don't understand. And the conversation between Draal and Delenn, it seems to be they both understand what he's implicating, which means, okay, he is probably going to end his life pretty soon. Now I do understand. And what that means is he's going to find a permanent place in the galaxy that he wants to go. and be able to be of service to a different people. And that also means he's never going to return to Minbar or be in contact with many other Minbari. And given Delenn's high status, he won't see her ever again. This idea saddens Delenn very much, and she's not really given a ton of pushback. In fact, she's coming across as being, pretty melodramatic about it. The Minbari, and I guess whoever the actors are in these type of scenes, are very expressive and emotive. And Delenn is just letting you know that they respect this type of action and movement. And she's not going to be able to do too much to convince him otherwise. But there's a lot more show left, so we'll save some of this for later. Now back to Garibaldi. He runs into a roadblock trying to secure a channel to contact the Mars colony. He knows what's going on between Mars. He was one of those people who also lived and worked on Mars before the war. He is being frustrated because, remember his status, he is chief of security for the station. He doesn't have clearance to secure any other channel, and they just basically hang up on him. Now, here is why he is very concerned. Later on in the episode, he contacts Talia because she's Psychor, and he figures, hey, Psychor has a private channel which would allow them to contact anyone that they needed to. And so he asks her directly, and she says, what do you mean? Like, how do you even know about the private channel? And he tells her, forget about that. I just know that you got it. And to gain sympathy for his situation, he opens up to Talia, tells her about his former love, Lise, who lives on Mars, and he gives details about their whole relationship. Now, here's where we learn a lot about Garibaldi. He was fired from 4 previous jobs on Mars. He was in a relationship with Lise, and he was approached by Sinclair about being a chief of security for Babylon 5. He talked to Lise about it. She says, no way. They get into a scuffle, a fight, a big old fight. And the type of fight that I imagine is something like moonlighting. If you're old enough and remember that, yeah, just think of that. Anyway, they get into a fight. Garibaldi leaves and doesn't talk to Lise since. Now, if I'm remembering my timeline correct, that was at least 2 years ago. And because of the outbreak of violence on Mars, he is just now being concerned about her and using all of his resources and everybody else's to get in contact with her. I find this pretty interesting because I think with the character, the writers want to write him as like this hard-boiled cop. He's horrible at romantic relationships, and we'll find out a little bit later in this episode what his response or his interaction with friendship relationships are. But he does give Talia that sob story. And she tells him she's not going to give any promises. She'll see what she can do. And he just thanks her profusely. Now, personally, I, just being the thinker that I am, and maybe I'm an overthinker, I don't think a phone call 2 years later to a former love that I walked out on would go very well at all. And I don't care what the situation is. I think Garibaldi is setting himself up for utter failure. I wanted to point out this next part just because it's very short and it's interesting. Lando shows interest in getting involved with the planet. Sinclair and Ivanova are getting ready to send more Star Furies to do the survey again. And Lando asks, well, what happens if you find something of value? And Sinclair basically brushes him off. But I think that's a very important question for the audience. Like, what happens if Babylon 5 does find something of value? It is supposed to be a place of diplomacy. I guess the equivalent would be, think of international waters. So this maybe is intergalactic waters, even though Earth is in charge. And I think it's very appropriate for Orlando to ask because he wants to know how is he going to benefit from all this work that's being put in? And just like as he should, Sinclair is just kind of downplaying the whole situation. In the meantime, Ivanova is given an outline of how the Star Furies are supposed to work with the survey team. The survey team, they're doing all their best to get ready to go back. The head scientist is excited. He wants to go do more work. And, I can understand people being excited for their work, especially scientists. And he's kind of given the whole, I'm cool with dying for the sake of scientific progress. Ivanova, on the other hand, is very apprehensive, and she's telling them, don't go into the atmosphere. Star Furies are not meant for the atmosphere. If you get in trouble, we'll bail you out. But if you go into the surface, we can't get you. So, of course, as the survey team is approaching the planet, they decide that they are going into the upper atmosphere. Ivanova warns them, hey, don't go there. We won't be able to get you. Star Furies are not made for the upper atmosphere. The scientist is like, no, we got it. And lo and behold, as soon as they break through the upper atmosphere, they are under attack. The survey team are fired upon by missiles from the planet, and Ivanova has to save the day with her Star Furies. As the Star Furies are escorting the scientists' survey ships back, Ivanova gives this great monologue about how Ivanova is always right. Always listen to Ivanova. Ivanova is God. Actually, I think that happens in the hangar bay, but it's the same thing. Ivanova has this view, and actually the writers are showing this too. No one listens to Ivanova, and Ivanova is mostly right. At this point, Sinclair and Ivanova do say out loud that the planet serves a security threat to the station, and someone has to go down there and check it out. And lo and behold, who do you think goes down there? You guessed correctly. It is Commander Sinclair and Susan Ivanova. We switch scenes to a bar where Lando is, very happily laughing and drinking in a bar. And he notices that Garibaldi is soaking over a glass of water. And he just mentions that he never touches the stuff. This is a situation where I thought was funny because Lando gives his life advice about love, because that was his guess, and basically extends his friendship to Garibaldi and briefly cheers him up. Garibaldi does cheer up, and this is what I was talking about, their personal friendships. This seems something very deliberate, especially at this point, something very deliberate by the writers to show Lando reaching out and helping Garibaldi, because he does say it looks like you needed a friend. And when Lando leaves, as soon as he's gone, the bartender yells at Garibaldi like, hey, somebody needs to pay for that drink. And of course, who has to pay for it? Garibaldi. And, I laugh at this because at this point, we don't know what Lando's intentions were, other than he was going to scam Garibaldi to get a free drink. Why does an ambassador need to scam someone to get a free drink? I don't know. This could be a power move, but it also could be like a weird, expression of endearment. It seems like the people that Lando respects and cares for, he treats like trash at first, and then he later on treats them with respect. So we'll keep an eye on this part. As Lando is heading back to his quarters at this time, he sees a vision of the alien asking for help, and he blinks his eyes and he just leaves. But this is a second person that the alien has appeared to. So the first person was Sinclair. The second person, if I remember this correctly, is Lando. And the next thing is Sinclair and Ivanova. They are getting into their ships, and they're going to head down to the planet because they now want to investigate. Earlier on, what they find out is that the missiles came from deep underground, and the fissure that was surveyed was more than 5 miles. So when Sinclair and Ivanova are going down there, they're moving really fast. They pull some tricks to get past the planetary defenses, and now they've broken through the atmosphere, And Sinclair, he's like, yeah, we got past their defenses, but let's hope that there's some much, that we're right about this because it'll take us about 5 miles to slow down. What end up happening is they get down there. They're able to get past the traps. They're able to land. And this is where they begin their investigation of that planet. Ivanova and Sinclair, they land their planes or their ship. I keep saying planes. They land their ship and they see that they are, as they're deep in the planet, that it has giant computers. It looks like a city underground. And Sinclair is very surprised and astonished by this. Now, back on the station, Talia has an interesting conversation with one of the Psy-Corps representatives. They won't give Garibaldi access because it's their policy not to let anyone outside of the government know that that channel exists. And Talia explains, like, well, Garibaldi already knows that it exists. And that rep says he only suspects. And if we give him access, then he will know. And Talia responds, well, that's very paranoid. And I find that kind of interesting because she is a part of Psy-Corps. She has seen how people respond to Psy-Corps. And she's been in contact with other Psy-Corps members, including Bester. And it is in their nature. It's in the nature of Psy-Corps to be paranoid because they represent the space Nazis in this show. And I just thought that was pretty interesting because Talia, while she is pretty knowledgeable, she comes across as pretty smart. This is a very naive interaction that she has with them, which I find suspicious. But, as they have their conversation, the Psy-Corps rep explains, like, look, here's what we'll do. We won't give him access, but we're going to ask questions for him and we'll let you know we'll be fine. And so Talia goes back to Garibaldi to explain what they were proposing. And really, when they do check, the conversation that Talia has with Garibaldi is they looked around, the names of survivors was what they accessed, and Lisa's name was not on it. And that troubled Garibaldi and Talia. But she also says, like, just because she wasn't on the list doesn't mean that she was killed. It just means she wasn't on the list and maybe she's somewhere else. And this troubles Garibaldi, and it just shows how concerned he is, and it amps up the tension that he has. Back on the planet, Ivanova and Sinclair, they go through a series of booby traps and they find an alien connected to the giant computer, and they decide to quickly get him out of the computer and take him back to the station. The booby traps were crazy. They showed that someone had gotten down there before and they were dead. They have to wear their breathing masks while they're down there, but it seems when they're done, they're able to get out pretty quickly. So, I'm gonna leave that part alone. It comes up in the second episode that I recorded with the crew, so we'll discuss that a little bit more there. Delenn and Draal, they go into Lando's quarters, and this is part of Delenn's tour of the facility of the station with Draal. And Lando takes a moment, and this actually brings like some levity to the whole situation. And there's a comical scene where he is lamenting not knowing what the words of the hokey pokey means. Now, mind you, Lando is drunk, and his response to Draal and Delenn is like, let me make you a drink. Delenn, when she finds out what Lando was doing all that time, she goes, I should not have come. And that's when Lando's like, no, sit, let me make you a drink. And it shows him very happily mixing something for Draal and Delenn. I do have a question about this part. He obviously could not be making an alcoholic drink for them two. So I wonder what it is he's mixing and what he plans to give to them. It's not really explained. I don't know. But it looks like Londo is desperate for friends because he reached out to Garibaldi first. And now, as he's drunk, he's reaching out to Delenn, which if I don't care who you are, if you're not human or if you are human, the Minbari seems kind of like the stick in the mud of the galaxy between the religious cast that we've seen and the warrior cast that we've seen in other episodes. We don't know what the workers look like or what they do per se. Not many of them have been on the show, so we just don't know. But to me, it seemed like a last ditch effort for him to reach out to have a friend and have fun. And so we're reaching the end of the episode here. As Sheridan and Ivanova are returning to the station, Garibaldi, he is in CNC, and one of the other members of the crew, they yell out, "Hey, there is a big ship coming out of the jump gate." And it ends with a cliffhanger with all of them looking at the jump gate, and nothing comes through yet, just the show ends. So as we conclude this, we want to take a look at some of the threads that are being woven into this episode. This is not just for the 2-part series, but this is also going to become important later on in the entire series of Babylon. We have the larger conflict between Earth Force, like on the inside, pro-Earth humans, pro-Mars humans. We also have the conflict within the Minbari, which we got to see a little bit of that in the last. We're getting to see some of the conflict within Psychor, the conflict between the Centauri and the Narn. We don't know exactly what's going on with the Minbari. We have bits and pieces. We learn a little bit more about their culture. We have the conflict between Epsilon III and everybody else. The general conflict of the scientific community and the military community. And so we're ending this all off just taking a look at the different tense situations that are being presented. I think overall, the writers do a great job with showing what kind of drama there can be, advancing the story, and also getting people excited about seeing the next thing. I'm going to go ahead and end this here. I think in general, not saying anything would be best because I don't want to spoil anything. I'd say join us next time as we look at A Voice in the Wilderness Part 2 with the crew and join in the conversation. So before I get out of here, be sure to join us. Check us out on Facebook. We have the Voices in Hyperspace Facebook group. We're also on TikTok, and you can find Mel with Mel's Asylum. She's also going to be releasing more Galactic Tea, and we are both going to be releasing more impressions. So check out our YouTube as well, at Voices in Hyperspace. In the meantime, if you have anything fun, join the conversation either on YouTube or on Facebook. Be sure to like and follow this podcast. Let folks know where we are and that they can join the conversation too. Well, thank you very much. I'm Legendary Black Lion, and I'm going to get out of here. See you next time.